May I ask Brian?
You've done it, Mr. President. I was going to introduce Brian. It's his second visit to us, and this is part 2 of his smuggling talk. He's a very gallant man. He comes along and does a lot of talking about clubs, and he's got lots of subjects, 10 different subjects. Yeah. So be prepared, he's going to be back again.
Yeah.
But
jolly good. I'm going to stand over here. I think you'll hear me a bit better then. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me back again today. Unfortunately, some of you didn't hear part 1. I can't go through all the talk again. I know. But basically, I spoke about the very early days of smuggling in England, and in particular Essex. The main thing that was smuggled in the very early days was wool. English wool was of very fine quality, so that was smuggled an awful lot. And also, back in the 1700s, the main things that were smuggled was tea, because tea was very expensive to buy. Only the very rich people could afford the tea. And also tobacco as well. The main spirit that was smuggled was gin. Gin was only threepence a quart, to give you some idea of just how cheap it was. I won't go through the talk, but I did speak about Barking. I spoke about Leigh-on-Sea. If anyone know Leigh, yeah. Lovely place. That was a real smuggler's den down there. And also Malden. And really I spoke about various incidents in the southern area of Essex, up as far as Chelmsford. So today we go further north and see what you think. But what I will do is just read you the poem that starts part 1 to give you some idea of what I spoke about. If you wake at midnight and hear a horse's feet, don't go drawing back the blinds and looking in the street. Them that ask no questions isn't told a lie. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. 5 and 20 ponies trotting through the dark, brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk, laces for a lady and letters for a spy. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. And that's the first 2 verses of a much longer poem that was written by Rudyard Kipling, and it was first published in 1906. Those brief words really does tell the story of what it was like. And don't ever think that smugglers were figures and they didn't really get up to much, just smuggling a few bits and pieces. They were terrible people, the smugglers. They killed a lot of people. That would be the revenue officers, the excise and the customs. So we go on to part 2, and it starts thus. Between the mouths of the Blackwater and Colne, we have Mahalia country, so named after a book written by the Reverend Sabine Baring-Gould. Anyone heard of Sabine Baring-Gould? No? It doesn't surprise me, but you will know something that he wrote in a minute. The full title of the novel was Mahalia, a story of the Essex salt marshes. Baring-Gould was the rector of St Edmund's Church on East Mersey, Mersey Island, between 1871 and 1881. He was a prolific writer and he was an author, but he's now perhaps better known for his hymns, Onward Christian Soldiers, you'll know that one well enough, and Now the Day is Over. He supposedly knew much about smuggling on the River Blackwater. Goldhanger had a smuggling reputation. The Chequers Inn on the square was reputed to have been used for the storage of smuggled goods in its cellar. Inland Whittam is thought to have been used by the smuggling gangs. Well, we know that it was. Strong rumours suggest, well, they're not rumours, it's actual fact, that the Spread Eagle was much used for the storage of smuggled goods. The actual area used was a secret well that could only be reached through a secret passage that was up in the attic. I've seen photographs of this, so I know it's true. The only known seizure at Whittam was in 1812. Some years later, gin was seized at Kelvedon, and somewhat earlier, £2,000 of tea was seized in the same village. £2,000 of tea, which reminds me, can anybody remember what 10 pounds of tea was called from part 1? 10 pounds of tea was called a, give up? It was called a dollop. So a dollop of tea was 10 pounds in weight. Tiptree Heath, a long time bad area, thought to have been used as a storage area as well. Shallow holes were used covered in turf and brushwood on Tiptree Heath. Illegal imports could well have been auctioned off during the Tiptree Fair. I think that still goes on. Baring Gould suggested that many safe houses in the area were used for storage, including a pond at Paternoster Heath. Well, I'd never heard of Paternoster Heath, but I did find it on the map. It's 5 or 6 miles south of Colchester, and a place called Tulsent Knights. Now, I know these places because I get invited all over Essex to give talks, so I'm well versed in these. In fact, I'm going to Mersey Island later this year. Tollsbury at the head of the Woodruff Creek, long famous for its oysters and smuggling, of course. Many seizures right up to about 1800, but little after this date. Inland on the Mersey and Great Whitborough Road, we have the old Peldon Rose. Anyone know the Peldon Rose? You do. Well done. That's almost onto the Strood to get over to Mersey Island, isn't it?
Nice pub, isn't it?
Yes, it's a lovely old pub. Quite expensive to eat there, I might add. The reason I know that, I went in to see the manager when I was last passing it and said, what do you know about the smuggling in around the Peldon Rose? He said, nothing at all. He said, but if you find anything, would you let me know? True story. That is a true story. And it was a true story when I spoke to the manager of the Peter boat in Lee. He said exactly the same thing. Because that had a secret cellar as well in the Peter boat. So the Peldon Rose, said to have been used for storage in the duck pond alongside, was said to have or contain a large well right in the middle, where weighted tubs of spirits were hidden. It is said they were weighted down with salt. This area, i.e. Great Whitborough, Peldon and Langenhoe, was the epicentre of the Great Essex Earthquake. Who's heard of the Great Essex Earthquake? You have. And 2 people, any more? Gentlemen? No, you haven't heard of the Great Essex Earthquake. Anyway, that took place in 1884, 5.1 on the Richter scale. Yes, it's a bad one. Mersey Island, our 3rd largest island, lies 9 miles south of Colchester, at the confluence of the Blackwater and the Colne. It had a reputation for smuggling, but very little is found in the customs records. Colchester, the oldest recorded town in the country, of course, and situated at the navigable head of the limit of the Colne. The oldest port of the county, Colchester. The earliest known customs collector there can be traced back to the year 1360. 1360. In 1524, it is recorded that John Christmas, yes, was designated the collector of customs on wool. Colchester's port was at that time the New Hythe. In 1724, it was described as having a large quay, a good customs house with 8 officers. Probably the most notorious smuggler operating in the town was one John Skinner, also known as Colchester or Saucy Jack. No mention of him in customs records though, but he was very well known in the town. In 1748, the Colchester Customs House was attacked by about 30 armed men. £1,500 of tea were taken. The gang were pursued but never caught. They were last heard of at Hadley in Suffolk. The Hadley gang were the most notorious gang in the whole of East Anglia, and they were probably responsible for an attack on the Great Yarmouth Customs House, where one officer was killed and several were wounded. In February 1777, there was a major seizure right in the town itself, probably at a pub called the White Hart. Over 300 weight of tea was seized. I told you tea was popular. By 1816, smuggling was very much on the decline, but there were still regular sales of smuggled goods at the customs house. Some typical prices at the time, and wait for this, you'll be interested in this. A gallon of gin, 1 shilling and a penny halfpenny. A gallon of gin. 1.5 pounds of chocolate at 3 and 5 pence a pound. 6 pairs of shoes for 1 and 9 pence a pair. Goods from wrecked vessels were also auctioned, and more frequently as well. Now these sales carried on well into the 1830s, and the pre-Christmas sale became a regular feature of life on the Hythe.
I think we have a problem with your microphone. There's something happening on the battery maybe going.
Can you all hear me all right?
It's interference coming over it.
Oh.
Might be.
Turn it off, I don't need a microphone.
Smuggling money.
Yeah? That's going spare. Is that better? Any better? All right. By 1850, the sales had ended as reports of smuggling incidents were now a rarity by about 1850. The tidal stretch of the Colne from the inland port of Colchester to the open sea at Brightlingsea reach is about 9 miles. As early as 1715, concern was being expressed about the lack of customs officers based along the River Colne. Wivenhoe was used as a port of Colchester, and also the operations base of the Colchester Customs Cutters. From at least 1750, it was also a local centre for the Naval Impressment Service. They were dreaded people, the impressment people, the hated and despised press gangs they operated. In 1743, there was a large sale of seized spirit. It was advertised to be sold at His Majesty's warehouse at Wivenhoe, to be sold by inch of candle. Have you heard of this expression? You have. I can rely on you, I know. The inch of, this is what they used to do in the old days. They lit a candle, and when it burnt down 1 inch, the bidding would stop. I would think quite a small candle, because you wouldn't want to stay there for an hour, would you, waiting for bids? To the best bidder anyway. 640 large casks containing upwards of 5,900 gallons of brandies. The brandy will be put up at 5 shillings per gallon. Expensive, wasn't it? Oh, wow. For the encouragement of the bidders, 5 shillings a gallon. Wivenhoe's most famous or notorious smuggler was one Philip Sainty, a celebrated builder and designer of many fine yachts. Born in 1754, he died in 1844, so he had a long life. He was imprisoned many times in Chelmsford and the Fleet prison in London. He was declared bankrupt on 3 separate occasions, the last being in 1834 when he was aged 80. Just across the river from Wivenhoe and linked by a ferry lies Rowhedge, once known as East Donyland, considered by the collector as being the worst and roughest of all the Colne and Blackwater villages. Yet again by repute only, to have pubs with secret passages, and the ship is mentioned. So I've heard one story about secret passages, I've heard 100, and I don't think many of them exist, if any, from what I can find out. And moving on to Brightlingsea, very few seizures are reported in the records, but vessels from the town were seized all along the Essex coast. During the 1830s, one of the more notable families in the town were the Bacons. They owned a vessel called the Speedwell. When it was eventually captured, it was found to have a false bottom. As late as 1849, 2 men from Brightlingsea were charged with assault on a customs man. They were part of an armed band of between 30 and 40 men. The dispute centred around tubs of spirits and packets of tobacco salvaged from a wrecked vessel. Both parties were claiming the spoils. There was always problems with these people, including the excise men and the customs officials. The stretch of coast from Colne Point to Walton on the Naze is around 12 miles in length, known by some as the Sunshine Coast. Old name, the Smuggling Coast. Much smuggling went on, the main towns being Clacton, Frinton and Walton, with Jaywick and Holland coming somewhat later. Kirby the Soken had a reputation, been through there a few times. The Red Lion opposite St Michael's Church, a very old inn. Red Lion, by the way, is the most popular pub name in the country. Did you know that? Yeah, you did.
Question.
Good quiz question, that one. It is. The Red Lion is the most popular pub name. A very old inn, rumoured to have tunnels. Oh God, more tunnels. Some of them are ridiculous. Some of these tunnels would have stretched about a mile. Who's going to dig out a tunnel, 6 foot high and 4 foot wide? Major civil engineering feat. They just don't exist. It is quite possible that George Wegg the Elder, I don't know George Wegg the Elder, I don't suppose anybody here would, but he did once live in Clacton, made his fortune from smuggling, being very much involved with the infamous Colchester gang. In 1870, his old house was renovated, a vast amount of cellarage was uncovered. The sole access was by way of a concealed entrance in a brick-built kitchen. How about that? Near to the old Ship Inn down there. A customs watch house was erected at Walton Low, 1745. Very serious incident took place 5 years later, involving at least 10 well-armed men and a pack of mastiff dogs. The gang escaped and were last seen in Ramsey Village, 2 to 3 miles west of Harwich. I know Ramsey Village because I've been for talks up there. Hanford Water is often mentioned in the records. It covers 2,000 acres, at least with 10 islands, a maze of creeks and channels, ideal smuggling country. Quite possibly, some of the officers stationed here were in league with the smugglers. I think there is evidence to that. Great Holland was another notorious place, as was Little Clacton, the scene of a vicious and violent encounter in 1791. Both customs and excise officers were involved, which was rare. 3 officers were injured. By around 1800, smuggling in the area was much in decline, probably due to a strong military presence in the area. Wheelie Camp was within walking distance. Still odd incidents. John Scaley of Great Holland was fined £6,100 for smuggling 1,200 gallons of gin and rum. The date, 1814. A quote now from a letter written by Mr. C. Woodruff in 1908. Walton Old Church, that is St Saints, and Frinton Church, St Mary's, and claimed to be the smallest in England, were both used for storing smuggled goods. Yes, they were. At Frinton, a cloth was put across the church to hide the merchandise, and when removed, it was transported to a place called Hawksley, about 16 miles away. In 1724, Daniel Defoe described Harwich as a town of hurry and business, and not much gaiety and pleasure. For centuries, Harwich had been a member of the port of Ipswich. In 1693, it became a customs port, a cutter stationed here as early as 1685. Another quote. In the year 1744, the collector at Harwich, a chap called Griffith Davies, made the following comments in writing. We cannot walk the town without being insulted and threatened to be shot or thrown overboard if we dare to go on board the packet boats, they're the post office boats. A later comment by Davies, the Post Office total lack of interest and concern about smuggling on their vessels because of low wages for the crew. So they had to smuggle to get a bit of extra cash. Manningtree and Mistley on the south bank of the Stour were the only sub-ports controlled by the Harwich Collector. And Manningtree saw its trade revive in the opening of the Stour Navigation Canal in 1713, as with the other towns by reputation, many smuggling links. Mistley's original origins can be traced back to Saxon times. During the mid-1700s, it was turned into a spa town and a flourishing river port. Robert Adam designed the new port of Mistley. Anyone know Mistley and those places? You do? Yeah.
Nowhere near the sea, though.
Late 18th century saw uniforms being introduced, but only for commanders and their mates. Not friends, mates on board the ship, you know. It's, in 1818, a customs vessel made a large seizure, which included 432 packs of playing cards. That's weird, isn't it? 432 packs of playing cards. Why? Because there was a large, what am I trying to say? Large tax put on playing cards. Yeah. And it didn't come off until the 1960s. These have been liable for stamp duty since 1711. The days of Harwich being a busy packet port came to an end in about 1832 because the Post Office transferred their business to the River Thames. The RLI was sadly in decline by 1840. It was founded in 1824. Thankfully, a revival took place during the 1860s. Now, the Essex Police, founded in 1839, were given the legal authority to seize smuggled goods. In 1856, £3,000 of tobacco was seized at a place called Dedham. A good effort, really, as the force only numbered 202. In retrospect, 1856 can be seen as a watershed for HM Customs in respect of smuggling. On the 1st of October, the control of the Coast Guard, along with all its cutters, was transferred to the Admiralty. From this day onwards, customs officers were no longer armed. Between 1850 and 1875, duty-free allowances came into being. It was not until the 1890s that cigarettes began to be smuggled. Cigarettes were not manufactured in the UK until the 1880s. Player's famous trademark, the bearded sailor, was born along with brands such as Gold Flake and Wild Woodbines. The peak year for tobacco smuggling was 1882, with over 1,500 seizures. The first recorded seizure of cigarettes was at Harwich in 1893. 5 years later, the Queen's Pipe was lit at Parkstone Quay, the popular name for the furnace in the Queen's Warehouse, called the Queen's Pipe. One of the most dramatic changes along the Essex coast took place at Tilbury, when the new dock systems opened in 1886, the East and West India docks, the largest area of enclosed docks in the world. The Customs Service was founded in 1671 as a government department, the excise being part of the Inland Revenue since 1849. From the 1st of April 1909, HM Customs and Excise was created, and for the next 96 years, the officers would be responsible for the prevention of smuggling in the UK. In 1922, the Coast Guard was reorganised and placed under the control of the Board of Trade. In 1923, the Customs introduced a new force called the Coast Preventive to carry out anti-smuggling patrols along the coast. It was around this time that the public image of the customs and excise officers emerged. Large baggage halls, a stern uniformed officer, baggage marked with a chalk mark. I can remember this in the middle 60s, first time abroad. A normal procedure until the late 1960s, when the red and green channels were introduced. Up until 1978, Harwich was the only collection in the country. It then transferred to Ipswich, the name being changed to East Anglia and covering Norfolk, Suffolk and a large part of Essex. Perhaps the greatest change in the last 30 years was the development of Stansted Airport. In 1966 there were less than 10,000 passengers using it every year. A new terminal opened in 1991. The following year the airport catered for 2.2 million passengers. It may increase further, but the development is on hold, and I don't think they're going to get a new runway, not that I know of. Modern smuggling for these customers and excise is both diverse and challenging. New technology is a great aid to them. The greatest change in smuggled goods has got to be, thank you, drugs, i.e. cocaine, heroin and cannabis, ecstasy and amphetamines. In 1978, over 22.5 million in street value of drugs were seized. Half of that was heroin, by the way. There is no common pattern, and carriers can be anyone from professionals, and I'm sorry to the ladies to say this, but mainly the professionals are the ladies. Yeah? Yeah? And also students were involved and holiday makers. Modern technology helps a lot. The introduction of drugs detection dogs in 1978 has proved very successful and still is. In later years the dogs were also trained to detect all kinds of other products including drug tainted money as well. Concealment methods are varied to say the least. False bottomed suitcases, books, sporting equipment, imported gravestones were used, and even a complete suitcase made out of paste. That's cannabis paste. A few more. A large hollowed out Bible. A gas canister was used, which contained 25 kilos of heroin, and statues were used of the 7 dwarfs. Only one was hollow, and that contained cocaine. Which one do you think that was? Thank you. Always gets a laugh, that one. I love it. But that is a true story, I didn't make that one up. During the 1980s, several notable seizures of drugs. 1984, 4.5 tonnes of cannabis were seized at North Fambridge, over on the Dengie. Value £15 million. Europe's largest seizure. 22 men were arrested. 1987 saw the seizure of 576 kilos of tobacco at Hullhaven Creek on Canvey Island. Know it well? Well, I know Canvey Island well. In the same year at Grays, my hometown is Grays, at a place called Bruce's Wharf, I know that well as well. 1.5 tonnes of cannabis was found, worth £4 million. A highly profitable seizure of drugs occurred in 1989 when 300 kilos of cannabis worth £1 million was flown into a small airstrip near to a place called St Osoph. We know St Osoph? Yeah. Not far from Clacton, if you're not aware of it. I know it reasonably well. The smuggler was arrested the following day at Dagenham. His name was Michael, or popularly known as Mickey Steele, and he lived in a little tiny village called Angers Green, not far from St Osoph. He was sentenced to 9 years imprisonment. When Steele was resumed his smuggling activities after his release, ultimately he and a colleague, Jack Womes, were convicted of the murder of 3 men. That was the infamous Retterton murders of 1996. You remember the Retterton murders? They were all shot when they were sitting in a 4-wheel drive. Terrible. By a shotgun. The long smuggling trail, which started in the 18th century, has now entered the 21st century. Our journey's end. In simple times, the Customs and Excise is responsible for collecting indirect taxes. One of the major concerns is the illegal importation of restricted goods, which include drugs, firearms and offensive weapons, animals, fish and plant products from outside of the EU, and pornographic and paedophilic material. From 2002, it can seize drug-related money and criminal money as well. For the year 2003 and 4, the latest published figures that I could find, the total net revenue of money collected amounted to £115.7 billion.
Oh God.
In the same year, nearly 2 million cigarettes were seized. 54 of those were counterfeit brands, and that's what mainly comes in, the counterfeit brands. 185 tonnes of tobacco. Same year, 1,600 kilos of heroin, over 20,000 kilos of cocaine, 1,200 kilos of ecstasy, and 57,000 kilos of cannabis. And 10,000, sorry, I said that wrong. 1,091 persons were sentenced, assets of £18.3 million recovered. It is believed that 90% of the heroin in the UK originates from Afghanistan. Cocaine in the main comes in from South America. Cannabis, at one time, no longer, came in from North Africa. There are so many cannabis factories in this country now, it's unbelievable. Still in 2004, 2003 and 4, many seizures of money, 78 million, pornographic material, guns and knives, meat, fish and dairy products, and live animals and birds, ivory, plants, caviar, ginseng, counterfeit DVDs. Total number of staff in the Customs and Excise was almost 23,000, of which 4,000 were in law enforcement, otherwise known as the Thin Blue Line. As for the customs cutters, the original dates back to at least 1661, and they are still going strong. There are 5 in operation, and to build them at one time, probably more now, 4.3 million to build them. Detection officers have all the benefits of modern technology, a major one being freight scanners detecting not only drugs but people as well. A major problem in recent times for the C&E is or was cross-channel smuggling, estimated cost the Exchequer £3 billion every year. Much criticism was levied against customs for heavy handling of shoppers due to loss of trade. Hover Speed even threatened to sue customs for 50 million. In 2004, the EU decided to proceed against the British government for its heavy handling policy. What came out of that, I'm not sure. In June 2001, 3 million cigarettes were found at Harwich under customs control. They were delivered to Sittingbourne in Kent, where another 5 million cigarettes were found. Revenue involved, 1 million. An Ilford man was arrested at Stansted carrying 3 packages of cocaine paste, value £500,000. The organiser received a 15-year sentence. The maximum for drug smuggling is life. A huge haul of cocaine was seized at Southend in 6 large bags, dropped off from a Boeing 707. The drugs were worth 22 million at street value. The pilot and the co-pilot were each sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. So many more large seizures. Thurrock Services on the M25, 264 Super Kings at Purfleet nearby, 18 kilos of cocaine were found, £1 million worth. On the A414 near Chelmsford, 40 kilos of heroin was found, concealed, value around 2.4 million. In excess of 300 years, customs and excise, men and women have pitted their wits against the smugglers, and many have lost their lives as well. A far cry from the days of the old riding officers on their horses trotting around the coast. Officers patrolling the coast prevented men on their motorbikes. That came after the, that was in the 20th century. In June 2006, the Serious Organised Crime Agency came into being. Also that year, revenue stamps would be placed on bottles of spirits, duty paid. In April 2005, a new department, HM Revenue and Customs, finally came into existence. A sad story for many customs officers, especially as its long history can be traced back some 1,000 years. But perhaps one should recall Benjamin Franklin's words that he wrote in 1789. In this world, nothing can be said for certain except death and taxes. And in respect of taxes, however and by whomsoever, they are nevertheless collected. And last but certainly not least, during April 2010, 4 containers were seized at Tilbury Docks. They contained 35 million cigarettes, the biggest ever haul at the port. On the 3rd of August 2011, 1.2 tonnes of cocaine were found on a yacht at Southampton. It was 90% pure. I don't know much about drugs, but I understand 90% pure is quite something. And had a street value of £300 million.
There you go.
Because they mix it with other things, don't they? It took 6 days to find it. The origin of the drug was the Caribbean, en route to the Netherlands. Well, I think you've heard enough of me now, haven't you? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening. I know there was a lot of facts and figures there, but I hope you enjoyed it. I never get tired of telling the stories. And again, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the excellent lunch. Thank you very much. Can I sit down now, please? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. It's two actually. The first one is slightly a question, but I think the next one will be something that I think we'd all be interested in. The first one is you talking about the press gangs.
Yes.
Is that where they got the dropping the king's shilling?
Glass bottom tankards. I talk about that in my talk on pubs and science.
Yeah.
You're quite right. Glass bottom tankards.
Yeah, I always had a habit of looking in my glass. But,
Yes.
but the second one, when you was talking about the candle, the inch candle.
Inch of candle.
Inch of candle. Well, recently I discovered on YouTube, and this is why I say you may be interested in this, if we remember an Eden line. An Eden line? Yeah, James and Eden and and Plains, wasn't it? Well, there's actually one, it was a long series, wasn't it? But I actually come across that one where it was actually called an inch of candle.
Inch of candle, yeah.
An inch of candle when actually James and Eden actually did a bidding.
Yes.
And they watched the candle go down to it.
Yeah. Unusual, but it did happen.
But if anyone wants to see an Eden line, just go onto YouTube and type in an Eden, and there's lots of good programs on there.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Is that all? Okay then, thank you.
So, from what you say, it doesn't sound like fake news at all. So do you think the United Kingdom being a much smaller country than the USA, we should have built a wall all around the country?
Yeah, good. Well, I think it'll take some time to do. You want me to draw something here? Right, okay. Raffle tickets at the ready, ladies and gents. Your number is 461.
Oh! I've got to put it on the camera.
Can you do that now? Before I do that,
Thank you.
So now there is.
I'll print these, by the way.
Yes, Mr. President. That was an enjoyable talk on the history of us who lived in Essex for many, many years. And who knows how many of those smugglers were ancestors. I know my father worked on the river for many, many years. We never went short of anything. It's part of history, part of family, and it's still going on today, unfortunately, with human beings as well as other items. Where it'll ever stop, I don't know. But it was enjoyable to listen to. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Any other business?
Yeah, sure.
Just to Mr. President, allocated, just letting know, another assembly died last.
Yeah, it's probably
I've got some things going around, I don't know where they are, but rather than me chase them, if you can give them back to me please, there's quite a few forms. And also, as I said, there's that size, thank you, that size, and that size of flyers here. So if you would like some, please come take some and put them around the local areas, and hopefully we get, I mean, we can do everything we can do to make it a successful function. The thing we can't do, one thing is drag people along. So the only way we can do that is by advertising it, promoting it, and doing whatever we can to get the word out to the people of the community. So start now, we've got a few months yet, but just keep nibbling at it, and I'm sure that we will hopefully get a good number of people there this year.
Anyone else? So let me just remind you that the apologies book, the menu for next week, and the website, and if you have anything to change, please get in touch with Jeff. Let's just stand